Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of This Week in AML. I'm John Byrne, Chair of the AMLRS Advisory Board.
And I'm Elliot Berman, our Creative Director. We are excited to welcome you to the This Week in AML podcast,
where we explore key news and developments in the global financial crime prevention community.
Hi, John. How are you this week?
I'm good, Elliot. Getting ready for the holidays and hopefully a little. So even though the weather's cold where you are and where I am, it's a good time to relax and get ready for 2023.
Yeah, we're getting cold rain here.
Great.
I know there's a big snowstorm moving across the country, but it's been warm enough here that it's a cold, rainy day instead of a cold, snowy day.
Yeah, so a lot of news in the past couple of weeks. Separately, I was part of the DC chapter of ACAMS had an end of the year review, and I did a fireside chat with a House Financial Services staffer and Danielle Lindholm, who's great. And I'll just say high level, she mentioned that all the legislative directions to FinCEN are challenging because of resource issues, but there are some studies in the pipeline. She does expect before the end of the year, at least she hopes, their study on de-risking, which will be interesting. And obviously we'll cover that in early 2023. And some of the other items there that didn't make it to the finish line, the Enablers Act, which you and I have talked about, some of the provisions there obviously could have added to oversight of areas of gaps that we would argue. So I think there'll be a lot. I know there'll be a lot going on in 2023. So we will continue to cover all that. But the thing that struck both of us, I know we talked about this earlier today, and that's the guilty plea of Danske Bank, the largest bank in Denmark, to forfeit $2 billion. Danske Bank has been in the news, in the AML news for a couple of years, but a whole host of things in that case that I think we should spend a couple of minutes talking about.
Agreed. So it was a joint investigation by both the U.S. Department of Justice through the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, and where many high-profile cases are worked. And then also the Securities and Exchange Commission had a piece. And at its core, it had to do, the claims were Danske Bank committed fraud on U.S. banks. And the activity came out of Danske Bank had until 2019 a branch in Estonia, and that branch had a line of business that sought to attract non-resident customers, meaning people who were not residents of Estonia, some of whom were in Russia,
right?
And offering to assist them in the movement of large sums of money, including through the U.S. banking system with little or no oversight, which would be a lucrative line of business if you could do it legally.
Right, and the FBI was involved in this investigation. As we know, they work with their international peers and colleagues, partners to do the investigation. I think some of the key comments from the press release and certainly from the elements of the actual plea are that this is a correspondent bank risk model. This is why our regulators continue, and not just our regulators, but certainly FATF has made this clear. The correspondent banking is a high risk area that you need to be comfortable knowing that all throughout the pipeline that there is proper due diligence, reporting of suspicious activities, strong AML programs, none of which occurred here. And, obviously one of the keys for Danske was to get access to the U.S. financial system. And this makes it very clear, and certainly says in the press release from several of the key lawyers there. If you're going to use the U.S. financial system, you have to play by the rules. And if you don't, obviously, this is a perfect example of holding them accountable. But I was just not shocked, but I was very surprised by how much in this agreement Danske Bank clearly knew what was happening. Made no effort in some areas in terms of gathering information. There was, I guess, an internal whistleblower that helped provide some of the information. So did the audits that were done, information from regulators there as well. But this just seems to be, them thumbing their nose at oversight.
Yes. So one of the questions that often gets asked in the U.S. when we see something of this magnitude is, what happened at the senior levels of the institution? As this investigation unfolded, and early in its life, when things were coming to light, the then CEO of Danske Bank resigned. So his name was Tom Borgen. His name still is Tom Borgen, and he actually left the company in 2018. There were several suits filed against him in Denmark, one of which was investors arguing that he had some personal liability to them or to the company, and the courts determined that that was a claim that the companies had to bring, that individual investors couldn't. There was also there was a criminal case against him, and he was acquitted. So he certainly has had a negative turn in his career, but interestingly enough, he isn't taking the kind of hit that the bank is taking.
No, and as you mentioned, a separate action from the Securities and Exchange Commission, and this was $400 million to settle those charges, and that's for misleading investors, as you mentioned. So that was part of it. What jumped out at me in terms of the SEC's release is that Danske Bank, as we said, acquired the Estonia branch back in 2007. It should have known the substantial portion of the customers were engaged in high risk activity, and that its AML and KYC procedures were not being followed, didn't comply. The SEC also alleged that the high risk customers utilized the services to transact billions of dollars in suspicious transactions through U.S. and other countries, generating as much as 99% of the Estonia branch's profits, which is pretty phenomenal. And then the comment from the director of enforcement was corporations that raise money from the public have to disclose that information that's material to investors, who then they get to decide what risks they want to take. That's the basic bargain of the securities laws. And that's obviously what the SEC complaint charge, that they violated the anti-fraud provisions of the SEC Act. So that's also in addition to the $2 billion. And this is, again, joint effort, FBI, SEC, Southern District, and obviously with their partners overseas. So a lot here, but it does go to the basic area of correspondent bank issues. And again, I think if you're any U.S. institution, what you learn, what questions are you asking in the correspondent bank field? What sort of documentation is it to show that their AML controls are solid? They're monitoring all those sorts of things. This is a clear example of why you have to think carefully about providing correspondent bank services. And, as we always say with enforcement actions, even if you're a smallish institution, you can learn thematically from these things. And this is a really good example of doing that.
Yes. And to the extent that one of the learnings is, to the extent that you do an acquisition,
right,
your corporate due diligence needs to include a comprehensive review of anti-money laundering, compliance programs, a real deep dive and understanding of service lines and product lines. There isn't any indication in any of the documents that this service line at the Estonia branch was like not known, that it was hidden somewhere. So, in the same way, I mean, obviously it's a very pedestrian comparison, but in the same way that if a U.S. financial institution is buying another one that has very high overdraft fees, which is much different than what was going on here, of course, but really tearing that down to the nuts and bolts and figuring out whether they're giving all the proper disclosures, whether they're aligned with the way regulators look at that issue, that would be really important. Well, so much the more so when you take a look at an acquisition and really understand what you're buying in terms of anti-money laundering compliance risk and other financial crime risk.
Obviously, I agree. So this is our last recording of This Week in AML, new recording for 2022. We will give you some archives the next couple of weeks. I just want to mention that you can go to our website, and we have previous podcast interviews with a series of folks in the past year that I think you'll find interesting. If you missed it the first time around, we've interviewed a few authors. There has been some focus on a whole host of issues that are both domestic and international. And again, they are readily available on our website. Early next year in January, we're going to be doing a webinar on human trafficking related topics and a whole host of issues after that. But we have several things in the pipeline planned for you. But I know that we want to wish everybody a safe holiday season. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your feedback. Also, always interested in people you think we should interview or topics we should cover. So let Elliot and I know that as we plan our 2023 programming.
Yes, thanks, John. So the date of that human trafficking focused webinar is Wednesday, January 25th. It'll be at our regular time, 1 p.m. Eastern and 6 p.m. GMT. And for those of you who aren't aware, January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And so, we urge you to think about how your institution can raise the awareness of this really challenging problem, which is truly global. It's local and it's global, like so many of the most difficult problems. So we're certainly going to try to provide the webinar and some of our previous materials as resources, but look for other resources as well, and think about how your institution can spend a little bit of time raising awareness next month. So John, I know I will actually talk to you, but happy holidays to you and the family, and we'll do our first live one the first week of January.
Thanks, Elliot. Stay safe, and good wishes to your family as well. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.